Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a city that never truly sleeps, Chang'an, the bustling capital of the Tang Dynasty. Imagine the sound first. Horses clattering down stone roads, the faint clink of bronze coins, paper lanterns rustling in the soft night air. You're walking beneath a sky swollen with the glow of oil lamps, threading your way through streets so wide that entire caravans could turn around without brushing a wall. The scent of sandalwood, fried dumplings, and wet parchment tangles in the air. You're here to study, to dream, and, let's be honest, to panic. Because tomorrow, you might be sitting the imperial examination, the Tang Dynasty's greatest invention and its most reliable source of national insomnia. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not the studying, not the waiting, and certainly not the paperwork. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in Chang'an during the reign of Emperor Xuanzong, a ruler who believes order can be written into existence, preferably on good quality bamboo paper. The city stretches across miles of ordered avenues, each lined with mulberry trees and patrolled by watchmen who carry bells instead of lanterns. Every evening, the bells ring across the wards, a soft reminder that curfews exist, but so do exceptions, and you, clutching your exam scrolls, are one of them. In the Tang capital, ambition hums like static. You feel it in the air, thick with brush dust and nervous sweat. To the east, incense drifts from the temples. To the west, merchants shout over bolts of silk from distant Persia. Even the pigeons seem to coo in bureaucratic tones. Historians still argue whether Chang'an truly held 1 million residents or merely felt like it. But no one disputes the sense of magnitude, the feeling that all of China, and maybe the world, had converged here to trade, to gossip, to test their luck. You pass through a market where spices from India scent the air, and glass beads from Byzantium glint like trapped stars. Someone offers you candied lotus root, someone else offers advice, usually bad. Don't quote Mencius. The graders are tired of him, one man warns. You nod politely, even though you have already memorized Mencius backward and forward, and possibly in your sleep. The roads are layered with footprints and the discarded hopes of previous examinees. The exam system, newly perfected under the Tang, is both a ladder and a trap. Theoretically, anyone, farmer, merchant's son, monk, can earn a place in the bureaucracy through sheer intellect. In practice, you need years of tutoring, expensive ink, and a patient landlord. Still, the dream persists. Pass the exam, earn a silk robe, bring honor to your ancestors. You find your boarding house tucked behind a perfumed garden wall. The innkeeper barely looks up from his abacus. He's seen too many of your kind, hopeful, nervous, ink-stained. The room smells of dried tea leaves and despair. Someone in the next room is practicing calligraphy at midnight. The rhythmic scratch of brush on paper sounds oddly like breathing. You pour yourself a cup of tea, strong, green, bitter as regret. Tea has recently become the scholar's companion of choice. Before, people drank fermented wine or boiled herbs, but tea, tea, keeps the mind alert and the hands steady. The Tang poets call it liquid clarity. You call it barely enough. Outside, Chang'an glows like a lantern in fog. Musicians pluck pipa strings in distant courtyards, their melodies winding through the night like thin silver threads. Somewhere, a messenger gallops toward the palace gates with dispatches sealed in red wax. The empire breathes, a living thing, and you're one small lungful in its vast body. You wonder how many others are awake right now, hunched over their scrolls, reciting passages from the Analects under their breath. Too many, probably. The imperial exam is the great equalizer, yes, but it's also the great insomnia distributor. The test itself is almost mythical. 8-legged essays, poetry composition, historical interpretation, and policy proposals, all judged by anonymous officials who may or may not have spilled tea on your paper. Your candle sputters. You stare at the wax pool, half hoping it will extinguish itself and give you an excuse to stop. But you know better. The Tang bureaucracy does not reward early sleepers. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, followed by the metallic ding of a watchman's bell. Time melts. The night thickens. You scribble a few last notes about filial piety, because that always earns points. There's a small superstition among students. On the eve of the exam, one should write the character for success on a slip of red paper and place it under one's pillow. You've done that, though your handwriting was shaky. You whisper a quiet wish to whichever deity handles bureaucratic miracles, maybe Confucius, or maybe the household spirit who tolerates your ink stains. You think of the emperor himself sitting somewhere behind layers of courtyards and golden screens. Does he know what you endure for his system? Does he care that thousands of men are currently losing sleep, health, and probably hair over his dream of perfect governance? Historians still debate whether the Tang emperors truly believed in meritocracy or simply found it a convenient fiction. You stretch, bones cracking. Tomorrow you'll enter a small cubicle, a literal one-person exam cell, and spend days writing essays judged by men you'll never meet. For now, you trace the faint outlines of the city walls through your window, hearing the quiet shuffle of monks heading for early prayers. Somewhere down the street, a tea house owner begins heating water, the hiss and sigh of steam rising like the first whisper of dawn. You make a mental note to stop by tomorrow. Whether to celebrate or to drown your sorrows, you can't yet say. The candle finally dies. The room plunges into darkness, except for the faint, persistent glow of the city beyond. You breathe in the scent of spent wax and damp parchment. The capital hums, awake as you drift somewhere between hope and exhaustion. For tonight at least, Chang'an keeps its secrets. Morning comes reluctantly, dragging a pale light across your cramped room. You wake with a stiff neck and a faint outline of the success charm imprinted on your cheek. Congratulations, you've literally slept on ambition. Outside, the first sound you hear is the rattle of wooden buckets as servants fetch water, followed by the shrill caw of crows perched on the inn's tiled roof. The city is already alive again, as though it too has an exam to pass. You step into the courtyard, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and find fellow examinees already awake, some pacing, others muttering passages like small prayers. A boy no older than 15 recites the classic of filial piety with a trembling voice. An older scholar, his beard flecked with gray, watches him fondly and then sighs. You both know the odds. Breakfast is a bowl of thin rice porridge and a cup of lukewarm tea. You pretend it's a feast. The tea, at least, does its job. It shocks you awake, sending a jolt of earthy bitterness through your veins. Tea has become the lifeblood of the Tang intelligentsia. Before it was fashionable, the aristocrats preferred wine. Now even officials sip from delicate porcelain cups between decrees. Historians still argue whether tea truly spread because of monks who praised its ability to aid medication, or because desperate students needed a legal stimulant. Either way, you're thankful for it. Back in your room, the candle stub from last night has collapsed into a waxy ruin. You light a fresh one and spread your papers out. Cramming, it turns out, is an art form. You've memorized the Analects, the Book of Songs, and entire chapters of history, yet somehow there's always more. You copy key phrases again, brush gliding across paper, each stroke deliberate, rhythmic. The repetition feels hypnotic, almost meditative. Your neighbor on the other side of the thin wall has been reciting poetry for hours. You can hear him debating meter with himself, occasionally groaning in despair. At one point he shouts, "Why did I think rhyme was easy?" And you can't help but smile. There's comfort in shared suffering. You glance at your reflection in a bowl of water. Ink smudges speckle your face like freckles. Your robe, once white, now looks like it survived a minor ink explosion. But you shrug.
No one will judge appearances tomorrow. Only your handwriting and the clarity of your moral virtue will matter. At least, that's what they say. The exam itself is the pinnacle of the Tang bureaucracy's obsession with order. Candidates will write essays on governance, philosophy, and classical literature. Success promises a post in government, maybe even a palace job if you're truly brilliant. Failure promises more studying. A lifetime of it, perhaps. Still, it's hard to imagine giving up after coming this far. Outside your window, the street hums with last-minute preparations. Stationers hawk paper and ink, vendors sell dried fruit for quick energy, and one man offers exam charms that definitely look homemade. You buy one, anyway. A tiny gourd tied with red string. Supposedly it traps bad luck. It rattles when you shake it, which feels promising. By midday, the inn's common room becomes a library of collective anxiety. Students huddle around low tables, muttering lines under their breath. The air is thick with the smell of tea and parchment. You share your table with a farmer's son, who's here on a local magistrate's recommendation. His accent lilts differently from the capital's polished tones, but his eyes burn with the same mix of hope and exhaustion. He tells you he studied by candlelight in his family's granary, memorizing Confucian virtues while rats scurried around his feet. If I pass, I'll buy my mother silk shoes. You nod. You don't tell him how many silk shoes could be bought for the cost of this journey alone. By evening, you feel the edges of your mind fray. Your fingers twitch from gripping the brush too long. You take a break, stepping out into the cool dusk. The sky glows violet over the rooftops, and the lanterns flicker on, one by one, like patient stars. You wander to a small tea house tucked between a calligrapher's shop and a shrine to Wen Chang, the god of literature. Inside, the air hums with quiet desperation and caffeine. Students whisper mnemonic tricks to each other, inventing poetic rhymes to remember obscure dynastic dates. The owner, a broad-shouldered woman with a laugh like cracked bells, pours tea without asking. Jasmine tonight, for clarity. You don't ask if it works. As the tea steams, you inhale its floral sweetness. Somewhere in your chest, a knot begins to loosen. You listen to the tea house chatter, rumors that the examiners favor essays mentioning the emperor's latest reforms, or that they secretly despise overly poetic answers. Historians still debate how fair the Tang exams truly were, but sitting here, you can't help feeling that luck counts as much as learning. Across the room, an old man with ink-stained fingers mutters to himself, "The emperor wants scholars who write like statesmen, not poets." Another replies, "Then why does he keep poets in his court?" The first man sighs, "Because even emperors like compliments." You sip your tea, hiding a smile. When you step back into the street, the moon is high, pale and distant like a coin tossed by fate. You walk slowly toward the inn, passing through the faint haze of smoke rising from food stalls. The city sounds softer now, vendors packing up, distant laughter, the creak of cartwheels. Back in your room, you roll up your study scrolls. There's nothing more to learn tonight, only to remember. You lie down, eyes open, tracing the rhythm of your breath, the faint echo of your neighbor still reciting verses next door. You imagine tomorrow's exam hall, rows of tiny cubicles, each barely large enough to sit in, each containing one man, one brush, one fragile dream.
Morning again, and the entire city feels taut as a brush bristle. You wake before dawn, long before the watchmen strike their bells, with the heavy knowledge that today's ink might decide your entire future. The inn is already stirring, men fastening belts, rolling scrolls, whispering memorized phrases into their sleeves, as though they're feeding secrets to the gods. Someone's sandal breaks in the hallway, and the resulting groan sounds like a death knell. You eat breakfast in silence, a steamed bun that tastes mostly like nerves and a gulp of tea gone cold. The bitter edge bites the back of your throat. You remind yourself that emperors once drank this same brew, that perhaps, if you sip deeply enough, you'll find their steadiness, or at least stay awake. The walk to the examination compound feels endless. The streets of Chang'an are misted with morning dew, banners fluttering overhead, street sweepers moving quietly, leaving behind lines in the dust as precise as calligraphy. Everywhere you turn, there's another hopeful scholar, each carrying the same bamboo writing case, the same clenched jaw. It's a parade of sleepless ambition. When the high walls of the exam compound finally loom into view, your stomach tightens. The gate is carved with dragons, ornate, smug creatures that look like they've already passed the exam. A registrar shouts names in order, his voice echoing off the stone courtyard. You line up, present your papers, and in exchange receive a wooden tablet with your candidate number burned into it. There's something grimly final about that little slab of wood, as though you've just signed a contract with destiny and it didn't read the fine print. The guards lead you inside, through long corridors to the exam cells. Narrow cubicles built of wood and plaster, each scarcely wider than your shoulders. Your desk is a plank, your chair is another plank. Your privacy is absolute, though the sniffling of your neighbors proves that absolute is a relative term. You unpack your supplies, brushes, inkstone, paper, and that small gourd charm that rattles like hope in miniature. The examiner gives a short speech you barely hear, something about integrity, diligence, and not bribing anyone. Then the test papers arrive, each sealed with red wax. You break the seal. The first essay prompt unfurls like a cruel joke. Discuss the balance of benevolence and punishment in the governance of the realm, citing historical precedent. You stare at it, mind blank for a heartbeat. Then words begin to trickle in. Confucius first, then Mencius, then a dash of personal flair that probably won't impress anyone. Still, the brush moves, and that's what matters. The hall fills with the whispery sound of brushes scratching paper. Occasionally, someone coughs or sighs so dramatically that even the examiners look up. You fall into a trance, writing, pausing, thinking, writing again. Each paragraph feels like a duel between memory and fatigue. Halfway through, your brush slips and splatters ink across the page. You freeze. For a horrifying second, you imagine the examiner reading your essay and seeing only a black blot, the abstract painting of your failure. Then you remember what an older scholar once told you. Every blot is a chance for poetry. You smudge the ink carefully into the shape of a plum blossom and continue as if it were intentional. That, too, is art. At noon, a guard rings a small bell and the scent of food wafts through the compound, rice, vegetables, and a suspiciously watery broth. You eat without tasting, your mind still half in your essay. You realize you've written for hours without noticing time's passage. Outside, the sunlight pools like gold over the courtyards. Inside, it just makes the ink dry faster. When the second essay prompt arrives, it's worse. Compare the moral philosophy of Confucius and Lao Tzu regarding human nature. You suppress a groan. Historians still argue whether Tong examiners truly valued original thought or simply wanted confirmation that you had memorized the right opinions. Either way, you decide to gamble. You write that both philosophers would have agreed on one thing: how unpleasant these exams are. A risky joke in your own head, but the faint smile it brings steadies your hand. Time stretches thin, bending between ink strokes. The air grows warm, thick with the musk of ink and human effort. Somewhere, a bird chirps from beyond the walls, mocking you with its freedom. By evening, your hand cramps so badly that your characters start to lean like drunken officials. You shake out your wrist, glance over your work. It's not perfect, but perfection, you remind yourself, was never a human invention. It was a bureaucratic one. A guard calls time. Brushes still, inkstones are capped, papers stacked. You bow your head as your scrolls are collected and sealed for grading. There's something intimate, almost sacred about watching someone carry away the physical embodiment of your sleepless nights. Outside, the air feels cooler, gentler. You breathe for what feels like the first time all day. The street beyond the gate bursts with life, vendors selling dumplings, students comparing essays, some laughing too loudly, others too quiet. You, for once, do neither. You walk towards the nearest tea house, where exhausted candidates gather like survivors of some elegant battle. The tables are cluttered with cups, crumbs, and occasional sighs. A young man beside you mutters, "I wrote 5 pages on benevolence and forgot to define it." Another stares blankly into his cup, whispering the same line over and over. Did I quote the wrong dynasty? You sit down, letting the warmth of the tea seep into your fingers. The first sip burns, but pleasantly. It feels like the world melting back into softness. You can almost hear your pulse slow. The tea house owner, recognizing the post-exam haze, slides you a small plate of candied ginger on the house. "You'll need the sugar," she says. You thank her, too tired to explain that no sugar in the empire could sweeten the uncertainty of the next few days. Still, when you step back into the twilight, the streets no longer feel suffocating. Lanterns swing overhead, and laughter drifts from open windows. For once in weeks, you have nothing to memorize, nothing to prove, only the slow satisfaction of having survived. You glance back once at the exam compound, its gates closing with a heavy thud. Inside, your essays sit stacked among thousands, waiting for unseen eyes. You whisper a small prayer, not for glory, just for a fair reading. As night deepens, you make your way home, feet dragging, mind floating. The moonlight glints on the rooftops like ink drying on parchment. And for a moment, you imagine the emperor himself reading your words, nodding faintly, sipping his tea. It's unlikely, of course, but so is everything worth dreaming. By now, tea has become your steady companion, a gentle hum against the chaos of exam season. You pour a fresh cup, the liquid warm and fragrant, curling into your senses like a soft promise. The day stretches before you, hazy and slow, yet full of small pleasures, the scrape of a brush, the distant laughter of street performers, the faint rustle of silk garments as officials walk past. You realize, with a faint smile, that Tang-era Chang'an has a rhythm all its own, and that tea is both the conductor and the quiet applause. You wander toward a tea house tucked between a small paper merchant and a shrine adorned with carved dragons. Its wooden beams are polished by years of hands resting on them, and the scent of dried leaves hangs in the air, sweet and earthy. The owner greets you with a nod, and without asking, pours a steaming cup. "For the scholar," she says. And you nod, recognizing the ritual for what it is, a pause in time. As you sip, your eyes wander to the walls lined with scrolls and faded paintings. One depicts a scholar reclining in a garden, brush in hand, while another shows the emperor observing exams from behind screens, a quiet smile on his face. The juxtaposition is almost absurd. High stakes and serene leisure, ambition and contemplation mingled in ink and paper. Historians still argue whether Tang tea culture grew more from meditative ritual or sheer necessity to stay awake during exams, but you suspect both played a role.
At a corner table, two former candidates debate the proper method of brewing tea. One insists that the water must boil thrice. The other argues that gentle simmering preserves clarity. You listen quietly, amused. In the city outside, merchants hawk pastries, monks shuffle through the streets, and the soft laughter of children drifts from a nearby courtyard. Life continues in its subtle chaos, indifferent to your anxieties, yet strangely comforting in its persistence. You think back to your own exam, the hours of brush scratching against paper, the ink smudges that turned into accidental art. Tea had been your lifeline then too, a constant through nerves and exhaustion. Now, with exams behind you, it offers reflection, a moment to sit, breathe, and absorb the city's pulse. A young student joins your table, his robes smudged with ink. He folds his hands and confesses, "I think I failed." You smile gently. "Perhaps, but tea will help, either way." He laughs, a sound of release, and you realize that failure, when shared over warm cups, loses some of its bite. The sunlight fades, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. You linger, tracing the steam rising from your cup, and think about the countless scholars before you who have paused similarly. Some went on to high office, others to obscurity, but all carried the same combination of hope, discipline, and quiet desperation. Night settles over Chang'an. Lanterns flicker along the streets, painting them in soft gold. Somewhere in the distance, the emperor's carriage rolls past, unnoticed by most. You drink the last of your tea, feeling the warmth settle deep into your bones. The city exhales, the tea house quiets, and you rise, placing a coin on the counter. Outside, the air smells faintly of wet earth and roasted chestnuts. You walk home slowly, savoring the calm, aware that the soft ritual of tea, like a gentle tide, carries you from one moment to the next. You reach your room, light a candle, and pour another cup, not out of necessity, but out of habit. The steam rises in lazy spirals, reminding you of the many small comforts that persist even amidst ambition and anxiety. You sip, close your eyes briefly, and let the rhythm of Chang'an, the tang of tea, and the memory of inked pages lull you into quiet reflection. You wake to another soft dawn, the city still yawning beneath a pale light. Ink-stained papers from last week's exam lie neatly stacked on your desk, like little monuments to effort, or perhaps small warnings about overconfidence. The air in your room smells faintly of tea leaves, candle smoke, and the residual musk of yesterday's walk through Chang'an. You stretch, feeling the ache in your fingers and wrists from endless brushwork. Somehow, you already miss it. The scratch of ink on paper, the gentle scrape of bamboo against your palms. Today, you feel drawn to something quieter, something that might explain the mysterious way the Tang bureaucracy interweaves daily life with empire-sized ambition, the art of calligraphy. The city's workshop district beckons. Narrow lanes lined with small shops seem to hum as artisans begin their day, grinding ink sticks, sizing paper, and dipping fine brushes into inky wells. You wander past a shop where an elderly man hunches over a table, brushing characters with delicate precision. You watch, mesmerized. Each stroke flows like water over stone, controlled yet graceful. A man beside you notes, "Perfect handwriting can sometimes tip the scales of success." You nod, thinking back to your own exam essay where a stray blot of ink became a plum blossom by sheer accident. Historians still argue whether examiners prioritized aesthetic beauty over content, or if both were equally weighted. But here, watching these artisans, it feels plausible that appearance carries invisible weight.
Inside the workshop, a young apprentice offers you a brush. You take it hesitantly, feel the bamboo smooth beneath your fingers, and dip it into the ink. The moment it touches the paper, a strange calm spreads through your body. There's a rhythm to it. Press, pull, lift. The character forms, wobble slightly, then steadies. You realize that mastery, like patience, is a kind of meditation. Outside, the streets hum with life. A vendor calls out the day's bread. A child chases a stray dog across the cobblestones. A scholar debates the moral implications of filial piety with a friend. You breathe it in, feeling the subtle pulse of Chang'an beneath your feet, understanding how the city's rhythm nourishes its inhabitants, especially those who seek knowledge through repetition and ritual. After some time, you sit back, noticing the shop walls adorned with ink-stained scrolls, some centuries old. A particular one catches your eye, a letter from a scholar who failed the imperial exams repeatedly, but went on to become a celebrated poet. You smile, realizing the thin line between failure and legacy, and how even mistakes can turn into art. The sun climbs higher, warming your back as you leave the workshop. In a nearby tea house, the air smells of jasmine and freshly boiled water. Patrons sip tea in quiet contemplation. You pour yourself a cup, watching the steam curl lazily toward the ceiling. You remember last night's exam nerves, last week's ink blots, and now the comforting predictability of routine. Life has a way of balancing anxiety with small joys. As you sip, a fellow scholar across the room tells a story about a secret ink recipe said to improve handwriting subtly, though results are uncertain. You smile, thinking of your own plum blossom accident, and whisper, luck and skill in equal measure. The afternoon drifts into evening. Outside, the streetlights flicker on, casting soft pools of golden light. You rise slowly, feeling the pleasant fatigue of practice and reflection. The city stretches out before you, vibrant and calm all at once. You think of tomorrow, of tea, of ink, of the slow rhythm of life in Chang'an, and you feel that comforting, almost imperceptible pulse that will carry you through. The days after the exam drift by in a blur of half-sleep and speculation. You wake to find the air in Chang'an softer somehow, as though the city itself has loosened its collar. The nervous energy that once thrummed through every street has thinned into something almost human again. Curiosity mixed with exhaustion. You have no essays to write, no quotations to recall, only the awkward business of existing while your fate is quietly decided by strangers with brushes sharper than swords. The inn is quieter too. A few students have already left, claiming they couldn't bear to wait. They'll find out the results by rumor later. Somehow that seems easier. You, however, linger in your tiny room, alternating between bursts of hope and waves of despair. Your desk, once an altar of study, is now a battlefield of abandoned notes, crumpled drafts, and cold teacups. You decide that moping indoors is undignified, even by scholarly standards, so you gather your robe, smooth the ink stains that have become a permanent part of your wardrobe, and step out into the city. The streets of Chang'an stretch endlessly, precise as brushstrokes on a scroll. Peddlers shout about sesame cakes, storytellers perform under silk awnings, and monks rattle their wooden fish drums for alms. You drift through the crowd, blending in with 1,000 other faces that look equally uncertain about their futures. You find yourself drawn to a familiar doorway, the same tea house where you spent the night before the exam. The owner greets you with a grin. "Ah, the scholar returns. Passed already?" she teases, wiping her hands on her apron. You roll your eyes. "If I had, I wouldn't still be here." She pours you a cup of oolong without asking. Then you will drink patience, she says, placing it before you. The steam curls like the handwriting of a benevolent ghost. You sip, letting the faint bitterness settle on your tongue. Around you, conversations buzz. At the next table, a group of scholars argues about the emperor's new irrigation project. One insists it's revolutionary. Another mutters that it's merely muddying good farmland. Historians still argue whether Tang Public Works were truly driven by benevolence or just elaborate photo opportunities for bureaucrats. You, listening, can't decide whether to care. Soon enough, someone brings up the exams. It always happens. They say the chief examiner favors essays that quote the book of documents, one whispers. No, says another, it's all about calligraphy now. Form over meaning. You hide a smirk. Last night's tea had better form than half your essay. As the conversation swells, a wiry young man at the corner table slams down his cup. All this talk of merit, he declares. We all know the rich buy tutors, the poor buy luck, and the examiners buy tea. A ripple of laughter runs through the room. Even the owner chuckles. Buy tea, do they? Then may they drink enough to choke on fairness. You raise your cup in silent agreement. The Tang dream of meritocracy was a beautiful one, perhaps too beautiful for real life. Historians still debate whether the system truly opened doors or merely painted them to look that way. But for now, sitting among these voices, you find comfort in the shared absurdity of it all. When you leave the tea house, the afternoon has ripened into gold. Street musicians play under parasols, their strings singing above the low murmur of trade. A troupe of actors in bright masks performs a morality play about an honest magistrate who refuses a bribe. Audience laughter suggests everyone recognizes the irony. You wander farther, drawn by the smell of roasting chestnuts and something less tangible, a pull towards simplicity. Away from the main roads, you discover a narrow lane shaded by paulownia trees. At the end stands a small workshop, its sign painted with two characters, Ink Dreams. Curiosity wins. Inside, a man sits surrounded by jars of black pigment and bundles of bamboo brushes. His sleeves are rolled up, his smile faint but genuine. Looking for ink? He asks. You nod, pretending to browse, while your eyes roam the room. The air smells of soot and pine resin, oddly soothing. He grinds a fresh ink stick on a stone slab, explaining, best ink takes time, slow grinding, steady water. Rushing it ruins the tone. He gestures for you to try. You kneel, mimicking his movements. The sound, stone against stone, a whispering rhythm, feels meditative. You could do this for hours. The inkmaker chuckles. You scholars chase words, but sometimes the ink itself teaches better lessons. You smile, unsure whether that's profound or simply a good sales pitch. Either way, you buy a small stick. He wraps it in silk and says, when you use it, think slowly. Good ink rewards patience. Back on the street, you slip the ink stick into your sleeve like a charm. It feels oddly reassuring, a tangible reminder that creation, unlike exams, requires no permission. Evening falls as you return to the inn. The courtyard glows with lantern light, shadows flickering over tired faces. Someone plays a soft melody on a bamboo flute. You sit by the window of your room, lighting a candle more out of habit than need. Its flame dances lazily, echoing your drifting thoughts. You wonder about the examiners now. Somewhere in a guarded chamber, a group of men in silk robes bends over piles of scrolls. Are they reading yours at this moment? Are they nodding in approval or frowning at your makeshift plum blossom inkblot? The idea makes your stomach twist. You reach for your tea kettle. The water boils, hissing like a polite dragon. The sound is comforting.
You pour a cup, watching the steam rise and blur the edges of your reflection. In that soft haze, the city outside looks distant, almost painted. Chang'an reduced to brushstrokes and memory. You remind yourself that no matter the result, you've joined a lineage of dreamers who dared to believe that ink could change a life. Some succeeded, most didn't, but all of them, in their own quiet way, kept the empire's heart beating through words. Somewhere below, laughter drifts up from the courtyard, a joke about exams, of course. You smiled despite yourself. Maybe failure, when shared, becomes a kind of victory. You finish your tea slowly, tracing a finger through the steam until it fades into the dark. The candle burns low, the ink stick gleams faintly on your desk, and the night folds itself gently around you like a silk robe.